he said so much, worried about what he did. He joined the Liberal Party of Canada. Does that mean he changed his views? Did that mean he went to become sort of a centrist liberal? No, he did not change his views. He said that when he joined the Liberal Party, he said, "I will tell you one day when I enter politics, it will be with the Liberals. I don't want to be a missionary all my life." It wasn't a question of Pierre Trudeau abandoning his views. It was Pierre Trudeau infiltrating the Liberal Party of Canada because that could be a vehicle for his views. Now, think about this. 1972, Pierre Trudeau barely held on to power, essentially by 2 seats. There was 109 seats for the Liberals, over 107 seats for Bob Stanfield and the Conservatives, despite the fact that Trudeau took 80% of the seats in the province of Quebec. So what did he say? Being reduced to a minority government. I'm just going to slip through that slide. He said, being reduced to a minority, he said, it allowed me to put forward more advanced left-wing projects. I knew that the NDP under David Lewis would back me up. I was thus able, this is in 1972, to institute policies I had been dreaming about for a long time. I had been dreaming about for a long time, a natural with the NDP. The reality, ladies and gentlemen, is Pierre Trudeau's view for a just society was nothing other than a socialist economic manifesto for Canada. Now, philosophy is one thing, results are another. Ask yourself this. This is unemployment rate. You can see it at the back. The red line are when Pierre Trudeau's time in office. Why did unemployment rise from 4.5% in 1968 and rise steadily to 11.2% by 1984? Rising in good times and bad. You'd normally expect unemployment to fluctuate. This is pretty much a steady rise. And why was it close to 4 percentage points by the mid-1980s, the early 1980s, 4 percentage points above the level in the United States of America, falling only unemployment rate after Trudeau left office? Why did that happen? Let's look at government spending. Now, this isn't government spending just dollars. This is the percentage of the gross domestic product. This is government spending increasing 15% per year on average over Trudeau's 15 and a half years in office. And that is after cutting military spending in half during his time in office. Spending was rising at that level. In 1978, Trudeau boasted that he had cut spending by $2.5 billion in his memoirs. The reality is, when you look at the numbers, his spending in that year increased by 8%. We can remember, well, think about Trudeau's inclination to spend money. In 1983, Marc Lalonde was the Minister of Finance, and he had invited photographers into his office to show off his brand new shoes, which is a tradition of finance ministers. And a photographer had taken a picture, actually, of the budget document and revealed contents of the budget document. And there was a figure in there of a make-work program of some $400 million. And it looked as if, having been sloppy with his documents, that the Minister of Finance would have to resign. What did they do? They just increased the program by $200 million, from $400 million to $600 million, just so the minister could say that when he tabled his documents in the House of Commons, that was seen for the very first time. That's what they sort of thought about spending. This was something that came very naturally to them. Pierre Trudeau was a spending machine, and government spending as a percentage of GDP increased from 17% to 25%. That's a 45% increase of every dollar that the government was touching. He was a spending machine. Of course, what did that lead to? That led to deficits. What I'm showing here is the operating deficit. You take interest and mortgage payments, debt payments completely out of the equation. You just say, how much money did you take in and how much money did you spend on programs? Reality is, over Trudeau's 15 years in office, he didn't pay one plug nickel of interest on the debt. That we had nothing but an operating deficit. Mulroney, by contrast, had an operating surplus over his 9 years in office of $41.5 billion. Jean Chrétien had an operating surplus over his time in office of $400 billion, all of which was used to pay the interest and the payment on the debt. Because under Trudeau, we went on a mortgage holiday. For 15 years, we didn't make a single payment down on the debt. Reality is that Trudeau turned on the spending taps, but he lacked the political courage and the moral compass to fund his grand design. And taking the political heat, if he had raised taxes, at least we would have said, okay, you want to spend the money, you want a just society, tax for it, don't put it on the backs of our children. But of course he didn't do that, because he wanted to keep getting elected. He wanted to be popular, leaving it to the next generation to clean up the mess. Now, this debt load that he left to us as a percentage of GDP, we went from having one of the best debt to GDP ratios in 1968 to one of the worst by 1984. In other words, we were falling behind almost all other countries. And we accumulated this debt, remember, while the government was spending money like crazy. It's like we were in perpetual stimulus mode. I mean, we see today with Prime Minister Harper that he did increase spending, quite significantly during the recession, but now it's coming back down. And the debt as relative to the size of the economy is now starting to come back down. Here's an interesting figure. If the deficit that Pierre Trudeau was incurring in, say, 1983, for example, took place today, it would have resulted in a deficit of $142 billion. So, we're struggling today with deficits of around $20 billion. Think of this, under Trudeau, they would have been $140 billion. Now, you may have thought, well, what if I kept my job and I kept getting wage increases, maybe I didn't get impacted so much. Maybe some people did, but perhaps you didn't. But everybody was subject to the misery index. The misery index combines inflation, high interest rates, unemployment. The misery index today is less than 10. Under Trudeau, it was as high as 25. Now, what does that mean? I remember in the early 1980s going out to get a mortgage on my house and paying 22% interest rates. What would happen to the economy today if we had interest rates at that particular level, which were, I would say, a consequence of the high deficits? Something in my throat here. And this misery index that we were subjected to was higher in Canada than the United States for 13 of the 15 years that Pierre Trudeau held office. If you had a $150,000 mortgage while Trudeau was in office, you would have paid $7,000 more in interest in Canada than if you had a comparable loan in the United States of America. In fact, if you looked at how we stand, if you want to have a sort of composite look at our economy, look at the value of our dollar. We fell 17% against the American dollar, 47% against the Japanese yen, 68% against the German mark under Trudeau. Now, if you want to know why did we fall behind economically? Why were the results just so abysmal? Remember this, thank you very much. When Pierre Trudeau implemented wage and price controls, after promising not to in election campaign. Remember when he said to Bob Stanfield, what are you going to say, zap your frozen? Well, of course, Pierre Trudeau did the zapping when he was Prime Minister. After the United States had tried them and had demonstrated that they had failed. But Pierre Trudeau implemented them just after John Turner resigned as finance minister. And there was some crisis in his government. They wanted to show that they could act. But after he implemented wage and price controls, he said this in a year-end interview with CTV News. He said, wage and price controls are a massive intervention into the decision-making power of the economic groups, and it's telling Canadians we haven't been able to make it work, the free market system. We haven't been able to make it work. What does that tell you about the beliefs of Pierre Elliott Trudeau? Our economy did not flounder because of bad luck, because of bad timing. It was a result of Pierre Trudeau's policies. Take your pick. In 1971, he implemented reforms to unemployment insurance. The amount of money you got on unemployment insurance increased by 67%. The length of time you could be on benefits increased by 75%. The amount of time you had to work in order to be entitled for benefits was reduced by 50%. He turned 8 weeks of seasonal income into a year-round salary. And so instead of people getting other jobs, or in some cases moving to other parts of the country, or taking part-time jobs, they to a large degree stayed at home. Why was it that when they were doing a review of unemployment insurance, they found that the 29 people who were at the Banff Springs Hotel weren't workers? They were people who were actually staying in the hotel, giving rise to the unemployment insurance ski team. You want to know why the economy suffered? How about the National Energy Program? What did that do for job creation and investment? How about the Foreign Investment Review Agency? It's telling foreigners, don't come to Canada, don't bring your money, don't employ Canadians, we don't want you. It's repelling investment. 114 new agencies and commissions, 7 new government departments, wage and price controls, massive increases in regional development subsidies. His last 3 years in office, spending went up by 22.5%, 22%, and 23%, year over year. His socialist economic vision was clear, and the results were nothing but destructive. Now, let's look at our place in the world. We think of ourselves as what is our place in the world? Pierre Trudeau thought of himself as a citizen of the world, not a citizen of Canada. He didn't much believe in nationalism. He thought of himself as a citizen of the world, which was a note that he posted to his dorm room door when he was at Harvard. That's me, Pierre Trudeau, citizen of the world. Now, what we hear is that Pierre Trudeau brought great credit to Canada, that he put us on the map around the world, and that we were proud to have this great intellectual on the world stage. Now, let's just look at national defense for a second. In terms of protecting our national security, let's remember what Pierre Trudeau said when he abandoned nuclear weaponry for Canada. He said, "I'm not interested in protecting a few Canadian cities if that means we will be consenting to a kind of policy that we believe is dangerous to the world." What's he saying here about national defense? I'm not interested in protecting a few Canadian cities. Well, if we lose Vancouver, if we lose Toronto, if we lose Montreal, I'm not interested